Hi, we're going to continue now with our study of the philosophy of sex, love, and friendship, and we're also going to continue with the ancient Greeks. We were looking at Aristotle, now we're going to look at Plato. And specifically, we're going to look now at Plato's dialogue called the Phaedrus. Uh, I said it's a dialogue. It's a portrayal of a conversation between two people: Socrates, who's an older man, and a younger man named Phaedrus. Socrates is the main character in most of Plato's writings, which are all dialogues basically. Uh, and Socrates is, himself an extremely interesting character. His it's in another one of Plato's writings called the Apology that the sort of basic figure of Socrates is presented. Socrates was a real historical person, and he was put to death in Athens in 399 BC. And the Apology is the Plato's version of the speech that Socrates gave in his defense at his trial, where he was found guilty and subsequently executed. And the trial was basically for impiety. Socrates was accused of basically not believing in the gods, not believing in the gods of Athens that Athens endorsed. And so the Apology, his defense speech, is a quite a rich and full discussion of it's kind of an autobiography. Socrates tells you who he is and what he's done, but it's one in which he reveals an awful lot of his views about the gods and a bunch of other things. And Socrates is in a way kind of the original philosopher. And the thing that's so distinctive about him is that he went around Athens engaging in this practice of questioning people about their beliefs. That's to a significant degree, that's what we think philosophy is. It's not just accepting the things that people believe, but questioning them and trying to determine if other people or if we believe things for good reasons. And it's about trying to think for ourselves rather than just accepting received opinions. And that's really what Socrates stands for. And so in the Apology, he tells his basic autobiographical story. He said he had a reputation for being wise, and in fact he's saying that's ultimately why he's on trial. But he tells the story of that, and he says a friend of his named Chaerephon once went to the Delphic Oracle, which was a major religious site where the priestesses prophesied and so on, and Chaerephon asked them a question. It said, "Who's the wisest person?" And the priestess at the Delphic Oracle supposedly said, "No one is wiser than Socrates." So Chaerephon went back and told Socrates that, and Socrates said, "Well, that's weird. Why would the spokesperson for the divine say that no one is wiser than I am? Because I'm not so wise." And so he says that's what launched him on basically his lifelong practice of seeking wisdom. And what he did is he went around to the people who were presumed to be wise to try to find out what they knew, to try to find out what their wisdom was. And he would ask them questions and basically to try to learn. But what he says what he found is that when he questioned people, they tended not actually to have good reasons for their beliefs, to not really know what they were thinking, and so on. So he says what he ended up learning is that a lot of people think they're wise, but they're really not. And so he concluded, maybe that's why the oracle said there's no one wiser than me, because whereas those people think they're wise, but they're not, I don't even think I'm wise. So my wisdom is that I know that I don't know things. And so that's kind of a famous thing you might know about Socrates, even if you didn't read this. That he says, "I know that I don't know." But just exactly what he means by that is actually it's not straightforwardly obvious, and it's really worth studying that text, the Apology, and studying more in Plato, where Socrates comes up in all kinds of conversations, to learn just what he means by that. It's very very rich and interesting stuff. But anyway, that's the guy now who in the Phaedrus is having a conversation with this fellow Phaedrus, this young fellow Phaedrus. And Socrates runs up against him, and Phaedrus is very excited because he basically thinks he's got some wisdom from this other guy, Lysias. And so Socrates is going to do his characteristic thing. He's going to see whether the wisdom that Phaedrus now thinks he has really is wisdom or not. What Phaedrus thinks he has wisdom about is basically love and sex. And so he has gone listening to this guy Lysias give a speech, and he has basically memorized the speech. And so the first thing that happens in the dialogue basically is Socrates says, "Okay, repeat that speech to me," and Phaedrus can repeat the speech. That's in the Phaedrus. That's runs from in the marginal numbers 230e to 234c. In the translation I'm using from this book, Plato on Love, it's pages 93 to 96. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Phaedrus or Lysias says in that speech that's supposedly wise, before then turning to basically the way Socrates ends up presenting a very different view in relation to which that view actually does not seem wise at all. And that one runs from 244a to 257a, which again in this book is pages 108 to 122. And I'm also going to refer a little bit to another writing, not by Plato, but by another fellow from around that time who also wrote basically some dialogues that have Socrates as one of the main characters. Socrates is a pretty popular guy in Athens, and people who liked him after he died wrote little dramas about him going around talking to people and so on. And so Xenophon did that as well. And I'm going to read a little bit from one of Xenophon's works called the Symposium, which is the portrayal of Socrates at a dinner party where they're talking about love and sex, basically. Plato also has a work, also called Symposium, where they're talking about the same thing too, but it's quite different from Xenophon's. But anyway, I'm going to read just a little bit from Socrates' speech at that dinner party, at that symposium about love, when we get to it. But basically what I want to do is first tell you a little bit about what comes up in the speech by Lysias that Phaedrus reproduces for Socrates, before then turning to Socrates' quite different view about love and sex. And so the speech is presented as the speech that a non-lover would make to a beautiful young boy for the sake of getting him to have sex. So it's a speech that's meant to persuade. Right? So it's somebody saying, here are all the reasons you should have sex with me, even though I don't love you. And I don't know. You may not know that much about ancient Greek speechwriters and so on, and the whole setting here might seem a little bit odd. But I think that the things that are actually said in that speech are probably things you've heard. In one way or another, you've probably heard this speech yourself. Someone has probably tried to persuade you of this same thing. Maybe you've even tried to persuade others of this same thing. So the basic idea of it is really, I guess the core of it is really this. It's distinguishing love and sex, first of all, and then basically saying that sex is better without love. So you should go for it. And so I'm not going to go through and read the whole thing. I really want to just try to capture some of the core points, which I think should be reasonably familiar. They're also reasonably insightful. They're built around a pretty rich and interesting description of compelling description of our experience. So I hope both that you will see that these are, weighty observations, and also I hope you will think, oh yeah, right, I'm familiar with that kind of reasoning. And because Socrates, what Socrates has to say, which is really what we're trying to study here, isn't really going to say anything to you if you aren't in some way already engaged with this or already sort of moved by this. Anyway, so The the basic thing that speech does, Lysias' speech that Phaedrus repeats, the basic the basic point that it's built around is saying, well, think about what it is like when someone is in love, and you'll see it's got a lot of bad sides to it. So he says, what's it like when someone's in love with you? Well, they get really needy. I'm going to stress a few points. He makes quite a few points. I'm just going to stress a couple of them. But lovers get kind of needy. Initially, maybe when you get together with somebody that where you feel like you're in love or whatever, that seems really great. But one of the things that seems to happen is the kind of openness that first showed up. By openness, I mean like it seemed like life suddenly got bigger. This person was in love with you. It was like, great, the world kind of opens up. Weirdly, that openness often can seem to close down pretty quickly, right? Because the lover starts to feel needy. And whereas it used to be a nice thing to be involved with that person, now it seems like it's actually kind of holding you back or something like that, right? Or holding you back, or it's just not, it's not pleasant, right? Lovers get very clingy. Right? So that's one thing. A second thing is that people love you. Oh, they start getting really jealous. That's a big one. And so again, initially, this person seemed like they were there for you, and it's like, I think you're so great. I'm in love with you. I want to spend all my time with you, and so on. And then that turns into, I don't want you to spend time with anybody else. And what were you doing when I was in the other room, or when I wasn't here? Who were you on your phone with, right? And this very positive energy that initially seemed to be directed towards you starts maybe to turn into a little bit more of a negative kind of energy. So they're clingy or needy. Lovers get jealous, and then that jealousy isn't just kind of an attitude directed towards you. It turns out to be a bit of behavior that intervenes in your life. Like suddenly you don't get to go out with your other friends, or that person starts to kind of pull you away from your family and starts to get you in this suffocating little cocoon, right, where you're just together with that person. So this thing that looks like love and initially looks like it's going to open up the world can actually start to turn into something that's kind of like a little prison. So that's one of the big sort of thrusts of this kind of speech. And then he says, when people are initially in love, they're like, I'm so in love with you. It's like they go crazy, and they like, I want to buy you things. I don't need to sleep. I want to be around you all the time. I don't care. I'm going to show off in public that I'm in love with you, or whatever. Like people, when you're initially in love, it's so exciting that it leads people to ignore the normal rules of kind of sane behavior that they used to live by. And it's intoxicating and exciting for them to do that, and for you to be involved in that too. But he says, what happens is, eventually you break up with somebody. And then when that happens, when the relationship is over, that person who initially was like so positive towards you and was just crazy with all this stuff, actually, again, flips and turns kind of negative on you. And they are actually kind of unhappy about the impact you had on them, because it led them to do all this stuff. Like, I wasted all my money. I alienated all my friends. I did all these stupid things, right? And so that sort of madness that sort of can characterize the person who's in love with you, which initially can seem as intoxicating when you receive it as it is intoxicating to the person who feels it, can become the basis for a lot of subsequent grumpiness, right? And so this thing that starts off so nice after you break up can turn out to be very bitter and uncomfortable. And so there's there are lots more details, but I hope that those things I've said there, I suppose I should say, I hope you don't have this experience, because it's kind of sad. But anyway, I hope that those things that I've said are sort of, you sort of think of them as sad but true realities of what love is often like. And so the guy making this speech says, that's not the thing you want to enter into. So it's much better to to make a good deal. Like if you look at what's going to go on if you get involved with somebody who loves you, there's going to be a lot of unhappiness. You're going to get a lot more pleasure if instead of thinking that that's the relationship you need to be in to have sex, you should get involved with someone who doesn't love you, who just wants to have the pleasure of sex with you. You should get involved with someone who thinks, yeah, you're really hot and I'm really excited about you, and I think we could both have a really good time. Let's get together and do that. Right there it's just a straightforward deal. That person isn't in love with you, so they're not going to do crazy and stupid things that they're going to regret later. That person isn't super invested in you, and so they're not going to be super jealous either. Like, yeah, you can go have sex with somebody else too later. Just, as long as you have sex with me now, I'm not so worried about what's going to happen later. So, there's not going to be, you don't have to worry so much about a kind of backlash because of the huge feelings and huge vulnerabilities that other person sort of brought and now is not dealing with very well. Right? That's not going to happen. This was just a deal. You're going to get, so to speak, exactly what you paid for, or that's all the other person wants is sort of exactly what they paid for in that deal. And he says, it's just a much better deal. You're not going to deal with jealousy. You're not going to deal with regrets later and so on. You're not going to get any surprises. And it's kind of summed up when he says 233c, since I am master of myself and haven't been overwhelmed by love, right? That's why I'm going to be the one who's a better choice for you. I don't love you, but I'm totally self-controlled, and so you don't have to worry about everything. It's going to be a clear deal. That's my quick attempt to sort of summarize the point of that speech by Lysias that Phaedrus repeats. And as you can see, it's really contrasting the kind of madness that comes with love with the self-control of the sort of almost a business transaction of sex without love. I want that to serve for you, I hope, as a reminder of what should be kind of a live option. Like, it seems to me that's a pretty real and pretty weighty way we are encouraged, we are often persuaded to think about ourselves and to think about these things. And so Socrates' basic question is that wisdom? Right? So this person making the speech says you would be foolish to get involved with someone who loves you. So it's much wiser to get involved with someone like me, who's self-possessed and just wants pleasure. We'll have a good time together. And so Socrates is really saying, is that truly wisdom? Does that really capture what's at stake here? So now I want to turn to his speech and that little writing from Xenophon also on the side to see what he says instead of that. So in Socrates' great speech in the Phaedrus, he tells a very colorful story about the soul. He tells a story about gods and chariots and horses. It's really a great story, and there's a lot to learn by thinking it through. But it's quite colorful. I will mention a few bits of that story, but I really want to just focus on a central theme. So the central theme of the speech is madness. So remember, the point of the speech from Lysias was that the madness of the person who's in love with you is a problem. It's better to have the self-controlled attitude of essentially the business person with whom you're making a kind of a straightforward transaction. So Socrates in this speech is actually going to say, madness is a bit different from that. Love is a kind of madness, but madness is one of the greatest things. It's not a problem. He says actually, the best things we have come from madness when it is given as a gift of the god. It's right at the very beginning of the speech that he calls a palinode. So he's going to talk about madness. He talks about different kinds of madness, but then he says he's especially going to analyze or discuss the kind of madness that is erotic madness. Right? That thing when the person is passionately inflamed about you because of your beauty and so on. So that's what he wants to talk about. So here, so he's not disagreeing with Lysias' speech that the lover is mad. But he's really disagreeing on the significance of that and how to interpret it. And basically how to think about what's important and what's good and bad in our lives. And so but then to talk about sex and love in the way he wants to, he says, first, we actually have to understand what kind of thing we are. And this is the same approach we took in this class. We did this exact thing with Aristotle last time. First seeing what the human being was, and then in that context, trying to figure out what friendship and so on is. Well, the same thing here. Socrates first wants to say, what kind of thing is the human being? And then in that context, we will say something about what sex and love are. And actually, even more specifically, we'll say something about what beauty is. And he says lots of things about what the human being is, but the decisive thing is this. I think the most important sentence in the whole speech, for the point of view of ultimately getting the point, is at 249e. This is at the bottom of page 114 in this book, where he says, is about 5 lines up from the bottom of that page. He says, "As I said, nature requires that the soul of every human being has seen reality." What does that mean? What he means there is that he's trying to say something about what the distinctive character of the human being is. Remember, that's what Aristotle did in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, Chapter 7. He said, what's the distinctive thing that is the human function? And there he said, we're the animal with logos. That's what he ended up concluding, is that logos thing. Well, Socrates is saying something, it's not identical, but it's very similar. And he says that the thing about the human being is that every human soul has seen reality. And I think what he means by that is this. All around you, animals, sheep and horses and dogs and bees, whatever, are, meaningfully engaged with the world, of course. But they don't ask the question, what is it to be real? They just do their dogging or beavering or cowing or whatever it is, right? And they're meaningfully responsive to the world around them, but they don't ask the question, what is reality? Whereas we do, right? That's philosophy. That whole thing Socrates was involved in is asking that kind of question about what's the ultimate nature of reality and so on, right? That's what he was striving to do. And that's what human beings do. And so the distinctive thing about human beings is we can do that. That tells you something about us that we can ask that question. It means we are the kind of being that in our very nature, we're the kind of being that is attuned to what is ultimate. We're attuned to the ultimate nature of things, whether you want to be or not. And so we, like the dog and the cat, are wrapped up in our local little things too. But he says there's something alive in the soul of every human being that is basically a concern about the truth. Another thing to say in place of reality would be truth. We want to, know what is ultimately the case. So, when you're concerned about reality, that's not just a kind of cognitive issue. It's not just a question about a fact about things. When you're concerned about the ultimate nature of reality, that's also a kind of a moral issue. It's a question about what really matters. Is there really a God? Is this really good? Right? Those are those questions about the ultimate nature of things. And so his point is that's what makes a human soul. That's the humanity in being a human being. It's that you are concerned about ultimate things. And so, basically the thing Plato or Socrates is saying here is very similar to the thing Aristotle said, right? That as human beings, we have a kind of striving towards, well, Aristotle said, all human beings by nature strive towards knowing. That's the first line of his book called The Metaphysics. And that's a very similar point here, right? That we strive to bring ourselves in line with what is absolutely true, what's absolutely good. And so any human being will naturally want to do that and will naturally be fulfilled and satisfied through doing that. And it's a crippled human being who doesn't care about what's good, who doesn't care about what's true. There are such people, of course, but but that he's saying that's a person who has in some way been damaged. That's someone whose natural or sort of native drive towards the good has been probably somehow beaten down and lost. But anyway, so that's the first point he makes when he says, by nature every human soul has seen reality. In other words, it's like it's not something that happened when you were 2. You didn't go out and learn that there was an ultimate nature of things. It's more that it's in the very makeup of your soul that you come into this world already attuned to that issue, already knowing that there's an ultimate nature of things, and you want to know what that ultimate nature is. So he's saying that there's a kind of aspiration towards the ultimate that defines what it is to be a human being. And that's to a very significant degree where our human satisfaction and fulfillment will come from. And so that's, in other words, that's what we really want. So I wanted to bring that word want in because I want to say, what are human desires? Well, in a significant way, our desire is about that. I want to use the word desire because obviously desire has a lot to do with sex and so on too. And so in a way, the biggest point in what Socrates is doing is to say that the issue is learning how to interpret our own desires. Yes, we have feelings like erotic passion, but we don't automatically know just what that is. We feel it, but we don't totally understand it. And what we're going to do is we're going to interpret it. We're going to say, oh, I guess this is what I want. And Socrates is going to say, yeah, you can be sort of right or wrong about that. And so this point about the soul that he's just been making, about the human soul is sort of already attuned to reality, he's saying that's the key to interpreting and understanding our desire. Right? And so now let's get on to the love and sex thing. He said, well, actually, and so now I want to say something about beauty. So first of all, he talks about the human soul. And then he talks about beauty. And we're going to make our way to love and sex, which takes the form of, being attracted to someone beautiful. Right? So, but before doing that, he wants to say, what is beauty? And he says, and this is really the big contribution, I suppose, of this speech. This is the idea that things really hang on, and we're going to look at it again when we look at the speech in the symposium next time. He says, beauty is the way that in our everyday life we are reminded of the ultimate nature of things, basically. What does that mean? Well, it means this. You can see, a nice arrangement of colors or a nice arrangement of flowers or something like that, right? It's just a specific thing with specific sensory features or whatever, right? But when it's beautiful, the thing that's interesting is that in that little finite specificity, in that little just particular thing that happened to be there in the world with some color and some shape or whatever, you saw something perfect, right? When things are beautiful, there's this amazing coming together of the contingency and the specificity of just some particular thing, and the kind of like eternal truth. It's like perfection. The ideal is realized in this little real thing, right? In this little finite thing. So, it could be the beauty of a painting, it could be the beauty of a sunset, whatever, but let's stick to the beauty that's relevant to this, right? A beautiful person. You see another person who's beautiful. Yes, that person looks nice, analogously to the way that, eating some ice cream tastes nice. Yes, there's certainly it's pleasant to see nice features, right? But that really falls short of what it is that you're seeing when you see something beautiful. When you're seeing something beautiful, like, it's amazing. It's amazing because it's almost like you can't believe things could come together so well. And you can't take your eyes off it. right? Because it's almost unearthly. It's like, well, basically what he says is, it's it's kind of like the showing of the divine in a natural or human form. Right? And in fact, just to stick with that sort of metaphor for a while, people say, "Oh, you know, about a beautiful boy, you look like a god," right? Or about a woman, you look like a goddess. Like these are very familiar terms that are used to describe beautiful men and women, and for exactly this reason, right? That it's you to see something as beautiful. Yes, you like it, but it's more than that. It is being struck by the way that the perfection or the ideal or the divine seems to be present to you right there in that specific thing. So, so that's the description he gives. That's on in this book on page 115. That's around immediately before 250D. He said, you know, all the great things like you can't see the reality and truth and all whatever else. You can't see truth in an image exactly, but he says beauty he says, now beauty, as I said, was radiant among the other objects. And now that we've come down here, we grasp it sparkling through the clearest of our senses. A few lines down, beauty alone has this privilege to be the most clearly visible and the most loved, right? In that section, he's saying beauty is the way that the vision of sort of reality, what is the ultimate nature of things, is immediately manifest to you in your everyday experience. It's beauty is the only way that the absolute nature of things can sort of manifest itself in some particular sensible form, or at least the clearest way. That's the thing he's saying there. So I think that's actually a pretty exciting point, and to think about what's going on in beauty. And basically, he's then saying, you know, so beauty is kind of like it's kind of like an invitation. You get this amazing thing, and it's really an invitation to you to remember that you care about those highest things. And so what the experience could be for you is an opportunity to sort of rise to the occasion and interact with that beautiful thing so as to further your aspirations towards the ultimate nature of things. So he says, you know, and that's going to be basically, if we're talking about a beautiful person, he says that's really what love would really amount to, right? When you encounter something that's truly beautiful, someone who's truly beautiful. We're saying that someone is beautiful isn't just a matter of what their organism looks like. It's also that person, that soul, right? But you meet someone who's truly beautiful. That's really an invitation for you to be inspired by that person and by their presence to become a better person. And it's an inspiration to you to work with that person to help them become a better person, right? So if you think about Aristotle talking about a friendship of virtue, something very similar is happening here. He's saying that you really respond to the invitation to beauty when you let that experience be a reminder to you of what human beings are really about, and you let that aspiration shape how you interact with that person. So if you encounter a person who is beautiful, they are presenting you with that inspirational experience. And he says, you know, what can happen is if you allow someone to love you, in their sort of bestowing upon you the look of love, you kind of get your own beauty reflected back to you. And you get to see through their appreciation of it. You get to see exactly the same thing. You get to see that ideal that you could aspire to. And so in being loved, you're kind of given the opportunity to accept to fulfill your human aspirations and your human potential with that other person, right? So love is really connecting around our humanity, where humanity means essentially our aspiration towards the good and the true. And he says it is a kind of madness, because when you see something beautiful and you fall in love, like, you're overwhelmed by it, and you're overwhelmed by something that doesn't just answer to the terms of, everyday practicalities. So yeah, it's madness, but it's madness not because someone has gone crazy in the sense of lost touch with what matters. It's madness in the sense that someone is not just answering to the immediate terms of everyday desire and everyday practicality, but it has turned towards, higher goals, the highest goals. Anyway, I was saying it's an invitation. So the encounter with beauty in a beautiful person is an invitation to do that. But that's not but you don't have to do that. You could also say, wow, this person is so beautiful. It would be even more fun to have, some kind of pleasurable bodily feelings with such a beautiful person around than it would be to have those pleasurable bodily feelings without a beautiful person around, right? So in other words, you can encounter that beautiful person, and you can either let that experience be an opportunity or let it be something that lifts you up into a different way of living, or you can say, no, I'm going to just make that a kind of ornament to the way I was living already, right? And so that he says that this is right after that stuff, excuse me, that I was just reading a little bit about beauty. He says, so what happens when people encounter beauty? He says, if you're either a person who, well, basically, if you're a person who's really out of touch with that aspiration, like you haven't meaningfully engaged with that, you're sort of jaded, or he says, if you've become defiled, he says, of course, a man who was initiated long ago or who has become defiled is not to be moved abruptly from here to a vision of beauty itself when he sees what we call beauty here. So instead of gazing at the latter reverently, he surrenders to pleasure and sets out in the manner of a four-footed beast eager to make babies. And wallowing in vice, he goes after unnatural pleasure too without a trace of fear or shame. So he's saying, you could be a person who's really lost sight of the sort of defining human aspiration towards the good. And so encountering something beautiful is just an opportunity to, add a little bit of pleasure to your pleasure-seeking life. But that's one possibility. The other one is the possibility I already said. On the other hand, a recent initiate, someone who's still fresh in the world of human affairs, when he sees a godlike face or bodily form that has captured beauty well, first he shudders, and a fear comes over him like those he felt at an earlier time. Then he gazes at him with a reverence due to a god, And anyway, it sort of ignites those aspirations. It starts to ignite a little fire and makes you want to, rise up and develop something. And the point he really wants to make in there, with respect to both sides of that, is you don't, and this is the thing I was saying before, you don't actually know what you're feeling. You're struck with something, and it amazes you, and you think, what is this, and what am I going to do about it? And there are different choices. And one thing to do about it is to say, oh, this isn't anything that significant, but it's a nice little ornament for the way I already live. The other way is to say, I don't really know what this is either, but it invites me to open myself up to something new. Right? So the something new, is really a transformed way of life. That's sort of orienting yourself towards, growing towards the good or something like that, right? The other one is not a transformation at all. The person the soul that has been defiled or whatever, really only sees another opportunity for, adding a few more check marks to the terms in which he or she already lives. So there's a lot more to it than just those few things I've said. There's a lot more to that speech. But I really just want to get you to that point, to to seeing this reflection on the nature of the experience of beauty and thinking about what it's actually like, and seeing this idea that it can have kind of two sides to it. Precisely because you're seeing sort of the ideal or the perfect realized in a right here in a finite thing, you're kind of reminded of the realities of the ideal and the perfect, and invited to make your life here an occasion to pursue and realize those things. So it kind of announces that sort of higher realm you can dwell in. Right? Or on the other hand, it can be just a particularly nice version of the familiar worldly things you have. And so Socrates' point is that that first one, where you respond to the ideal and rise to your human aspirations, that's the best thing. And so what you precisely want is to get away from that business-like attitude where you're just trying to add an extra, prize to your daily take of familiar pleasures and so on. So in other words, if you go back to Lysias' speech and the person who's saying, like, you want me, like, I'm self-controlled, all I want to make is a business exchange with you where we each get some pleasure, Socrates is saying that's actually the worst thing. That's taking one of the most powerful experiences you could have and removing from it its distinctive human appeal as a way it can speak to your higher aspirations, and instead just treating it as something like a kind of a trinket. And I want to, in light of that, I want to just add that one more thing about his speech in Xenophon. When he's talking in the speech in Xenophon, he again says the same thing, like, what's it like to have sex with someone who loves you versus someone who doesn't love you? And he says the real thing you want to see there is that forget about the madness stuff for a moment. The more important difference is whether somebody wants to use you or whether somebody wants to care for you. And so he says that the non-lover who wants to have sex with you is more like somebody who rents a farm, whereas somebody who loves you is like somebody who owns a family farm. Right? So he says if you rent a farm, you don't deal with the fields in such a way as to take care of them and make them always stronger and better. Rather, you want to get in there and do what you can to get the best harvest off that land you can in the hurry, and you don't care what happens to it in the future, right? Whereas when it's your family farm, you care for it and you cultivate it so that it is healthy and flourishes. So he says that's what this issue of sex with a lover and a non-lover is like too. That the sex with a non-lover is like a rental. It's like what happens when you rent a farm or when you rent a car. Rent a car, you drive it fast and you don't really worry about the consequences because you only have to deal with it for, 1 day and 100 kilometers. If it's your own car, you'd never drive it like that. Right? And he says that's what's happening when you have sex with a non-lover. Right? You're effectively a rental car, and that's the opposite of the attitude of the lover that is actually oriented towards you to try to cultivate in you what is best. So that's a quick introduction to the speech in the Phaedrus, and with that little side note to the speech in Xenophon's Symposium. We're going to come back next time and talk about the speech in the Symposium not actually by Socrates. Socrates reports it, but it's by Diotima, a woman. And that's going to take us further in this study of beauty. And I think we'll talk again probably a little bit more about this speech from the Phaedrus at that time.